Warning, some viewers may find the following footage deeply disturbing.
Genius.
Hey, this is Kurt Wallace, host of The Kurt Wallace Show at randpaulreview.com. And we have a special guest with us today, a longtime friend and one of the great advocates for freedom in economics, Anthem Hayek Blanchard. And he's with cryptocurated.substack.com. Anthem, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Kurt. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
So, Anthem, we are in a very different time. There's a lot of adjustment. There's a lot of misinformation, a lot of knowledge out there around how the economics of everything are changing and shifting. And because of the influx of Bitcoin back in 2009, when it was introduced to the world, all the way through today, lots of changes. You are an expert in blockchain and cryptocurrency. You've had businesses in that arena and would like to start off asking you a little bit about your origin story around cryptocurrency. Would you please share that?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think we've known each other, I was thinking almost a decade or maybe longer now.
Well, 15 years, I think, since 2007.
Yeah, so that's incredible. That is incredible. So and I think around that time, I was still working with goldmoney.com, I believe. And so, so I got to start there in 2002. The co-founders, James and Jeff Turk, interviewed me and graciously brought me on board right out of college. And my dad had passed away in 1999, James E. Blanchard III. My parents are known for helping to advocate for the relegalization of investment grade gold bullion in the United States. It was illegal.
That was in the 70s, right? That was.
Yeah, it was 60s and 70s, mainly 70s. Yeah, it was legal from 1933 through 1974 for U.S. individuals to own. And so my dad was a real gonzo kind of guy, and my mom basically helped lead the charge as well. And they paid for a biplane that flew over President Nixon's re-inauguration as president that said legalize gold, and flew, today it'd probably get shot down. I don't know. And so they did that. My dad was paraplegic, paralyzed from the waist down from a car accident that he had as a teenager, and was fearless, effectively, probably as a large effect from that. He smuggled gold from Canada and brandished to bars and held press conferences around the U.S. threatening the government to arrest him. So, because it was illegal. And so this created a lot of hoopla. My parents organized conferences in New Orleans where they lived and where I grew up, and a newsletter as well that turned into Gold Newsletter. And they ended up building it was called James U. Blanchard and Company, the world's largest retail gold business. So that was kind of my upbringing. I'm named after an Ayn Rand novel, Anthem, and my middle name Hayek is after the economist. So actually Ayn Rand's on the wall back here. I got pictures of my family's conference in the back here. And then Hayek, actually, if you Google around in 1984, there's a meme that Hayek predicted Bitcoin. And my dad is actually the one that conjured the interview, the questions. He had just gotten appointed as a board of director at the Cato Institute, which is a real prominent think tank in Washington, D.C. And he served as a board member until he passed away in 1999. And he organized this event, and the transcript and the video are all available online. And it's incredible. That's 40 years later, the staying power of these men basically giving this interview. So that was my background. My dad was a seed investor in goldmoney.com. And that was how I got introduced to the founders out of college. And I went to school in Atlanta. I went to Emory, so your neck of the woods there. It was a great time and a great learning experience. And basically got this great opportunity, worked in New York for a couple years, and ended up meeting my wife in New Orleans and moved out to Santa Monica and then Las Vegas and then elsewhere, back in Oklahoma now, where Cynthia spent a lot of her childhood upbringing. We've been here about 5 years now in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, which is kind of a cool history. It's where plastic was invented. hula hoop, frisbee. The jet stream was first touched by a human being known here out of the airport here. Pretty interesting place where Phillips 66 was founded, where Citgo Oil Company was founded. It was called City Services back then. And fascinating place. I highly encourage everyone to check it out, especially if you're a big fan of Americana. So that was my upbringing, and it got me into digital currency really for 20 plus years now, really since we've known each other, I guess you can say. Ended up working, founding a precious metal startup company about 13 years ago. I think it was February of 2011, almost 14 years ago now, and launched that at the end of 2012, basically as a savings platform called Anthem Vault, and had a number of other startups that had coin businesses, other electronic platforms, cryptocurrencies. Ended up licensing all of the platforms to a company about 5 years ago, and then spun off a cybersecurity company, basically, really also selling products for other people. So that was kind of the big appeal there. And so, yeah.
So, in terms of sort of the economic landscape going from fiat to crypto, crypto has gone through various stages, and some people consider it a Ponzi scheme. Some people consider it digital gold. But there is no question that as the Federal Reserve acts the way they act, and as limited supply Bitcoin behaves the way it does, the results are really astounding. And we see FUD, periods of FUD. We've gone through crypto winners, and we've seen periods of real increase in kind of the investments into Bitcoin specifically. But wanted to get your kind of take on what's happened over the life cycle of crypto and where we are today, say over the last year. Maybe we just pick over the last year because we kind of know a lot about what's happened. But if you need to reference some of the cycles that have occurred, that would be exciting. And what is your take on why Bitcoin continues to increase in value, or cryptos in general?
I think that there's a total loss in confidence of all of our existing uh, communication structures and commercial structures. I think, it's been obvious if you really take a look at statistics, in terms of voting turnout, in terms of people joining religions, in terms of people joining social clubs or societies, basically. These are all things that for centuries, really millennia, were extraordinarily popular things, basically, that people just did. They were just quote unquote civic things, right? And we've seen a big opt out, especially in the digital age, especially in really, I would say, more the electrification age, and then it kind of went digital, right? The transistors turned into a lot of little transistors that we call semiconductors, right? And basically, then we started networking all these semiconductors together, right? And the internet, quote unquote, right? And the internet is acronym we see all over the place, right? HTTPS or SMTP, etc. That P on the end of all these acronyms for the internet stands for protocol. And the internet is basically a series of what's called private protocols of software. They're network software that require permission, right? So easy one's email. We all deal with it. Somebody's got to give you permission, whether it's Google or whether you have your own website maybe, and you're maybe your own email administrator, right? But there has to be an administrator, right? The difference between the internet and say something like Bitcoin, or Ethereum or Solana or any of these other public protocols is that they're still network software. It's just that they don't require any administration. In other words, they're a right, not a privilege, as long as you have a prerequisite number of software keys to use their software. And that's where the slang crypto, right, is, right? Or it's like cash, right? In this kind of software, metaphorically, they're really software keys that are rebiddable typically. Like in the case of Bitcoin, you can rebid them over and over again, kind of like a silent auction. And it happens about every 10 minutes. And basically, what you win when you win entry into this auction is basically the world's most secure data. That's the hardest information in the world to erase, that has a timestamp with it. So if you can think of all the public applications that we use today that require a date, a timestamp, anything that requires a notary, for example, right? That's an obvious one, right? Any kind of contract, right, that requires a proof that something happened, right? That's a really great application, a basic, very basic application, a clock, basically, right? A provable timestamp. So that's basically what Bitcoin is. It's the world's most provable timestamp. Now, nobody's really figured out, arguably, how to make this provable timestamp really commercial. And I think the reason why primarily is because the incentive structure we have today is still corruption commercially, because all of our commerce still requires human administration, and all human administration, in my view, involves corruption, because it's impossible to predict what someone will do. And that's ultimately the fatal flaw in predictability of any human administrated construct. It doesn't really matter what it is. So that's why I see crypto as relevant. That's why the meme coins and the NFTs, even prior, that were all just art, typically, now it's kind of evolved a little bit more into causes and purpose. I think 90% roughly of all the new protocols right now are launching on Solana, kind of the last 12 months or so. And because I think Solana is easier than Ethereum, which is really where the NFT craze was primarily focused in the last cycle. Each one of these cycles lasts about 4 years. And basically, these cycles are in rhythm to the decrease in the inflation rate of Bitcoin software keys. So, right there, the vast majority of Bitcoin software keys have already been created by the software. It's an automatic algorithm. And it's like a lottery, basically, that provides an incentive for people, or whoever, I guess, ultimately, to participate, to basically act as another bolstering the database. This is like a bunch of mirrored databases, right? And then there's an incentive to add more databases if someone wants to spend, right, their wealth to basically buy a bunch of computers and a way to cool them and a way to power them and a way to secure them, right? And that's a risk, of course, to get the reward potentially of these Bitcoin software keys, right? So,
and for those that are not familiar with crypto and Bitcoin, what you're referring to is what is the mainstream term for it is mining,
mining,
which is validating the transactions within the network as people transfer crypto between each other. In terms of over the last year yeah, I like what you said about, how did you put it? You said administration is, I'm going to put my own word on it, tyranny, is corruption, is use of force against freedom, right? It's a obstruction of human interaction and natural rights. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, I mean, we have administration. We don't have it in the blockchain space. I think that's why it's so interesting for people that really love freedom and they want to have the most liberty style world. Crypto is, if you think of currency as a form of communication, which is really what it is, from the Austrian perspective, we are relating to each other through exchange, through mutual exchange. Anyone that is a capitalist, they may even like free market capitalism. And so anyone that likes free market capitalism may want to consider having a form of exchange, a form of communication that's totally free and doesn't have the restrictions that a Federal Reserve System might have. So,
Yeah, right. I mean, a bank account is a privilege, not a right. I mean, a bank has every right to deny someone. It's not a constitutional right to have a bank account, right? So, uh,
mhm.
but at the end of the day, and it's not a constitutional right to have the internet. However, I mean, what percentage of people around the world do we think today have access to the internet? I mean, it's probably over 90%, right? I mean, which is insane. You think about people that live in these slums, right? There's probably a billion people that live in what I would consider a slum, and probably 90% of those people have internet, right? And so,
There's a town outside of Mumbai that has over 1 million people in it, and it's less than 3 square miles. And many of them have cell phones. And
sure,
yeah,
it's an essential, right? I mean, it's like literally water, air, cell phone, food. I mean, honestly, or internet, right? I mean, it's almost more than food now, I would argue. I mean, it's close, it's or a close third to water and and food. I mean, it is insane.
yeah,
How am I gonna live without it? Which is very liberating in a lot of ways. And it's
mhm.
enslaving, of course, but if you
It's
look
oppressive, sure.
at the alternative, right? I mean, it's a liberation. It gives us, it gives anyone a gateway, right? It gives anyone a gateway to anything, irrespective of their physical analog circumstance. And that's what really excites me. Selfishly, I recognize that the more people that participate in a market, the richer the goods and services, the better, cheaper, faster they're going to be, right? And so selfishly knowing that, I think in lowest common denominator terms for my self interest, in terms of working toward raising the very quote unquote perceived lowest, most impoverished type, outcome persona basically on in the world, right? Which is kind of what the internet and smartphones have done, right? Digital has done that. So this is just an crypto, Bitcoin is just public protocols are just an extension of the digital, right? It's a scaling of the internet, right? The problem with the internet is it encourages abuse, right? It
Mhm.
encourages bad behavior because companies are incentivized to maximize content irrespective of the validity of the content because it's free if somebody else is doing it for you, which is how social media and internet searches work.
Mhm.
So there's a lack of accountability purposefully because there's a disincentive for accountability. There's a reason why we watch fiction a lot more than we watch documentaries, for example, in terms of a movie genre, or fictional books, typically sell a lot more than non-fictional books, typically. So, and there's a reason for that, right? So, it's,
Yeah.
it's because truth is binary and it's impossible to prove in a world where all records are corruptible. And this leads us to the prisoner's dilemma, game theory, Hammurabi's eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, right? That was valid. And that was supposedly what, I don't know, 4,000 years ago or something crazy. And today we would say prisoner's dilemma, game theory is valid, right? So despite all this technology, all of these advancements in our tools to communicate and to function and to quote unquote survive, we're not really we're still playing this kind of survival game, right? Instead of like an abundance game. And it has to do with the doubt of the administrative state, in that by eliminating the need to have nation states as forced marketplaces and being able to have voluntary marketplaces, which is what I foresee public protocols becoming inevitably, invariably, we basically can eliminate fear and violence from our game theory of existence, of perceived convenient survival, which is kind of what I perceive. I think it'll be perceived convenient thrival is what's going to happen once we can eliminate the fear from the doubt that comes from not knowing how someone will act, irrespective of their perceived incentives. You know,
So in terms of authority and state, let's go ahead and talk about some of the people that are involved in that. Rand Paul, he's the first U.S. senator to accept Bitcoin for his campaigns, which is pretty awesome. It recognizes the validity of it, and then we fast forward to the last year. there's been a tremendous sea change in what's going on. Could you give us an analysis of what's happened over the last year, including what's Trump's shift and his evolution toward cryptocurrency, Bitcoin? I think he was even discussing Solana recently, which is incredible, and then maybe the pricing as well. Could you kind of talk about what's going on here and where we're going after the 20th?
Yeah,
It's a big question. It's like 3 questions in one.
I love it. No, these are some of my favorites. So my understanding is that cryptocurrency lobbying donations this last election cycle outnumbered all other donations of all commercial industries combined. I mean, we're talking defense spending, we're talking pharmaceuticals, we're talking banking, right?
I didn't know that. Wow.
Insane. And I think it's over 270 members of Congress are now vocally, publicly, quote unquote, pro crypto. So this is massive. President Trump, he was at the Bitcoin conference, that was in Nashville this past year, that the Baileys put on. Just massive public advocacy. And there's talk about strategic Bitcoin funds and states having strategic Bitcoin funds, kind of mimicking what El Salvador has been doing successfully. And it could really be a crazy panacea for a lot of this quote unquote perceived out of control debt. Maybe at the very least having a more soft landing or transition as our world moves totally digital in terms of the way that we commerce. So I think people around President Trump, or soon to be President Trump, I guess, so President Biden, right? But
sure.
I think that they see that very clearly. Obviously, Senator Paul does, by virtue of accepting Bitcoin, and obviously philosophically, it goes hand in glove with a lot of things that he and his dad have espoused for decades. So yeah, it's exciting times. So very, very exciting. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw, taxation changes, during the administration. I wouldn't be surprised. The strategic reserve idea, I wouldn't be surprised if there was something that legally got enacted. I think those are all on the table. So, and I think regulatory clarity would be applauded just throughout anyone that's an advocate in the space, right? Just to be able to help advance the space to commercial viability, which is in all of our best interest.
Can we talk a little bit about that regulatory clarity? Because the SEC they've gone one way, then they've gone the other in terms of, Bitcoin is taxable. Bitcoin is a commodity. Bitcoin is, and when the ICO market came about and that whole fiasco in 2017 that pushed the crypto winter, government continues to try to figure out how they can wrap their hands around this and control it. They can't control it, but they want to. Federal Reserve's trying to introduce their own crypto. Trump has said he's not going to endorse that. He's opposed to that. You are a victim of the state. Recently, you've been battling with the SEC, and it's they go after anybody that they can to try to rein this uncontrollable world of cryptocurrency. So what's your take? I know we only have a few minutes left. I know you've got another appointment about 4 minutes, but could you kind of give us a breakdown of what your thoughts are on the regulatory state and maybe a little bit of what you've experienced with it?
Yeah. So the SEC formally started investigating the company that I mentioned, Harrisoft, and the holding company since I believe it was August of 2022. It's been 2.5 years, and they went through a lead investor that was regulated by FINRA. It was tied to the SEC. So this whole Leviathan, and really, I would say it's a money thing, right? When this whole investigation started, it was really more like 2021, maybe even earlier, God knows, because it's also secretive. But now, the majority of Congress, I think, is pro crypto now, right? Like we just said, the majority of lobbying is crypto. The president is pro crypto. it's a very different situation than even a year ago. So, let alone 3 years ago, plus when we started really dealing with Operation Choke Point, whatever
Mhm.
this is, 10.0. I mean, Operation Choke Point's been going on for decades, the reality. So,
And I encourage listeners to Google Operation Choke Point so that you understand what's really happening right now, and also the misinformation in the mainstream media to try to suppress the validity of cryptocurrency.
yeah.
And
And,
yeah,
and, and real briefly, also to Google, the U.S. Supreme Court also ruled favorably for personal liberties in the Jarkessi and Chevron cases last
mm,
June. Why I can talk about it openly. I was going to be under a gag order otherwise by the SEC, but for
mm,
basically since the 1980s, the U.S. government, all agencies, not just to pick on the SEC, this was just across the board, would bring federal private tribunals effectively for all civil court lawsuit equivalents. So they wouldn't go to a federal court. They'd just do these kind of what I would call Soviet Union style tribunals that really
mm,
don't afford any due process. And so that ended. So again, it doesn't matter, any kind of federal agency, anyone is now afforded due process, both criminal and civil. Nothing, by the way, nothing for me or the company was ever criminal. Even with all the investigations, we've got Center for Individual Rights that's now representing us, which is a massive nonprofit civil rights group. So we're super grateful for that. I'm super grateful for them representing me personally. They're trying to lifetime ban me from doing a securities offering, lifetime ban me from being a publicly traded board member, officer, director, which I've done before, and trying to find me over $250,000. So this is what is being fought. And again, it's a microcosm of what's happening everywhere. It's kind of like a mini Trump situation, understanding how lawfare can be used to weaponize someone because it's free to complain to the government, ultimately, to government agencies. And if you've got a stalker, like we did in our case, that hates you for whatever reason, then they can incessantly complain to government agencies for free with very little repercussion if they're
mm.
lying, and how much they're lying. And that's basically what happened in our case, in short. So, just stay vigilant, know that transparency is winning the day. We're not quite there yet. Corruption's still winning the day, I would say. But now that Bitcoin has capitulated Wall Street with these exchange products from Fidelity and BlackRock and others that have been lapping circles around these exchange products that these Wall Street firms have been launching prior, my expectation is that cryptocurrency products from Wall Street are going to crowd out all other forms of financing from here on out. And, in a decade or so, probably, the majority of financings will be crypto, is my guess at that point. And so we're going to see an obsolescence, I think, of all of these violent, forced ways of doing things. That's the beauty. Um, that's the silver lining. We just got to get there. That's the asterisk. So,
Well, Anthem Hayek Blanchard of cryptocurated.substack.com. Thank you for your time today on Rand Paul Review.
likewise. Quick plug. Publish for free. No, I don't do any even sponsors on Crypto Curated. Every Wednesday, it's free, and it's interactive there. So feel free to leave comments. Obviously, I'd love for you to subscribe. I'd be honored. They're meant to be like 5 minutes or less reads every Wednesday. So thanks, Substack. Thank you, Kurt, so much, and thank you, Rand Paul Review. Really grateful to you and your audience for giving me an outlet here to communicate. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right.
Genius.